I'm here to talk a little bit about the Varnish release status and both what has happened over the last half year and also what we're planning for basically next release as well. My name is Tollef Heen. I'm the Varnish release manager. I work for Varnish Software. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the changes we've made to how we release Varnish, which is actually not in Varnish itself. We're in the process of rolling out a Jenkins setup. This means that we can actually release packages and tarballs much easier than what we previously ever had. So now getting packages for fixes, but also for releases is now a very simple process. So currently it's due to some limitations in how it's set up. It's limited to very few people, but the idea is it should be really simple for everybody to get patches tested and so on. Because we know that for very many users, it's much easier for them to test changes we provide if we can say, here's a deb or here's an RPM. The other tool we've started using a lot more is called Fryer. It used to be called the Varnish stress test suite, and it's basically a stress test of Varnish. It tries to cover the bits of Varnish that the Varnish test tool does not. Varnish test is good for testing functionally, but it doesn't add any load to any particular load. It's not a high-performance testing tool. Fryer is that bit. It adds a lot of tests, and we've found some bugs already, so getting those fixed is always good. The third tool is called Patchwork. It's a patch tracking tool. There's been some complaints from other developers in the community about us not being good at keeping track of patches and making sure they actually get merged. So that one I set up last week, so we don't have much experience with it yet, but the idea is we should, from now on, be much better about keeping track of those patches as they come in. A little while ago, we released 3.03. It was a release which took a very long time, which is part of the reason why we ended up doing the Jenkins setup. 3.03 was originally planned for Q1 this year, so it took like 6 months more than what we intended to. It's mostly a bug fix release. It has some features. We like to stick some extra good features into every release, but it's completely backwards compatible, and you should all upgrade to it if you're running 3.0. If you're still on 2.1, you should upgrade to it anyway. We don't have many concrete plans for 3.04. I'm considering doing one soonish, just to pick up a couple of fixes which missed the 3.03 release. So it's going to be a very tiny incremental release, probably no new features, but for instance, currently if you use ESI and compression, it will in some cases crash, which is bad. But it's possible to work around, so it's not really that urgent either. Okay, that's the 3.0 series. There might be a 3.05 as well. We don't know. Time will show. But we have a secondary branch of the 3.0 series, which is called 3.03 Plus. It started out as the streaming branch of the 3.0 series, but it ended up containing a bit more than just streaming. It's primarily been driven by Martin, who is doing some really interesting code. And the idea here is that it's kind of a staging ground for some of the larger changes that we want to push into the next major release, which we're not confident enough about yet to push into the main release. But we provide packages, and it's something which we would like people to test. Obviously, if it breaks, you can always go back to the regular 303 release. It has, as it says, streaming and persistence. Paul Henning is in the process of rewriting the streaming bits for JIT Master, which is going to be 3.1. And Martin just sent the patches for some of the improved persistence. In particular, the improvements, it means that you get the ability to garbage collect or do something resembling LRU. It's not actually LRU for the storage chunks in persistence, which means in the current release, if you use persistence and run out of space, Varnish will intentionally panic and restart, freeing up a bit of space. Obviously, that also causes it to disconnect all the clients and so on. So if you run a website where you're likely to run out of space and you rely on LRU, it's not a good solution. If you are fine with just expiring, the current solution actually works just fine. Okay, there are 4 bits we want into 3.1. It's on the list there. Streaming, as I said, Paul Henning is working on. There is a long-standing branch from our German friends, which adds if modified since support to, which means Varnish can go out and say, ask the backend if it has has a particular object, and more importantly, whether it has been updated since it last fetched it. Because for very many objects, it's much cheaper to ask for whether an object has been changed than to ask for the complete object. So the backend can go, no, it hasn't changed, rather than recompute whatever work it needed to actually deliver the object. If it has changed, you get the object as well, and the backend has to do that work. But it means in some cases you can extend the lifetime of objects in Varnish without having to regenerate the object on the backend. The third item is yet another very interesting bit, which is driven by some patches by Martin. Again, he's being really on a roll this release, and again, improved persistence. I'm going to talk a little, just give a small example of the libvarnishapi overhaul. It's from, like, in this list, it doesn't look particularly exciting, but you can do stuff like the last one, which you have no idea what it actually does, but what it shows is it will show you all requests where the backend transaction took more than half a second. So it will show you the complete client and backend request or backend transaction where that took more than half a second. You can also chain this, so you can say, and it should match a given URL, or the client IP should be so and so and so on. It's the first time we do a properly designed query language for Varnish log. So it's different from the current one in that the current one is really simple. It's just string matching, and this changes Varnish log into actually understanding a bit of the contents of the various fields rather than just running regular expressions across it. And as it says, it's transaction-based. You get sub-requests, and it is properly ordered within that entire how it's displayed as well. Yeah, so that's actually basically it. That's the big changes we're making. I'm not going to give you any date for when 3.1 is coming out. That depends on, amongst other things, when the persistence, the streaming stuff is done. Because the streaming bits, as Paul Henning talked a lot about with HTTP 2.0, it means that we're changing some fairly fundamental assumptions in how Varnish is built up. and rearranging all those blocks of code is a fair amount of code. So, questions?
Hi, do you have any approximate date for 304? We are rolling 303, well, probably next week, and we use ESI. So if there are any bugs that might affect us, I'd rather wait a little bit more.
I don't remember the exact details of that bug. I think it only hit if, Martin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it only hit if you enable compression in Varnish and your backend does not compress the ESI fragments. It's either that or the other way around. I can find the bug afterwards if you want. I wouldn't wait for 304. We're looking at, I'm hoping if we actually end up doing it, which I think is likely, I'm looking at this quarter, but somewhat later in this quarter. And it's going, the change from 302 to 303, it's much larger than the change is going to be from 303 to 304. I mean, 304 if not, it is not modified, right? So yeah, it's going to be a very small, so far I think I have 2 fixes lined up, plus perhaps some documentation and typos and stuff like that, but it should be about 2 or 3 fixes. It's not going to be like the change list for 304, which is, it's a pretty big list. It's much bigger than I want it to be, because it means we've been sitting on fixes for too long.
You just gave the best reason why to put IMS into 304.
Because it's not modified?
Yeah, that's the status.
Well, yeah. I don't think we're going to put that in there. It needs to hit Git master first. But that's absolutely on the list. We want that to get in. And I'm sad it's taken so long.
Yeah, me too. I should have done that one before I did the streaming. Yeah.
It's a bit late to say that now. So.
Can you foresee any circumstances in which 3.1 goes without the streaming, or is that absolutely a required feature for 3.1?
It's one of the, yeah, it's like the headline feature for 3.1. So no, there is streaming in 3.0 as well, but the problem with the streaming in 3.0 is that if you're trying to do stream and you suddenly then have a client which is on a slow network connection, and this is something which is going to end up in the cache, all the other clients are going to sit there waiting for the first client to download this object. This is not a problem if the object is a very small object, but then you're not really interested in streaming. If this is, say, a video of 100 megs and somebody is sitting on Greenland with a very poor cell phone reception and trying to watch this video, suddenly you have like 10,000 other people who also want to see this video, and they all have to wait until it's streamed to the first person. And that obviously is, it's not a recipe for a good user experience. So in 3.0, I would say you shouldn't use streaming unless you also pass the request. If you pass it to the backend, so it's not going to be cached, it's fine. But if you're going to cache the object and it's large, you shouldn't use streaming, because then you're going to be hit with slow clients now and then you're just going to be very, very sad.
So in 3.1, is streaming going to be, is there any reason not to have it turned on in 3.1? What semantics does it change that we need to know about?
The semantic it changes is that currently in 3.0, if you don't have streaming on, between VCL fetch and VCL deliver, we have fetched the entire object from the backend. Meaning that if there's something wrong with the object, say the content length is wrong, we can actually recover in VCL deliver and restart, or you can do something. If you have started streaming, you can't recover because you've already started sending data to the client. So at that point, once you've sent the headers and start sending the body to the client, you can't recover. You can cut the TCP connection, or you can send it null bytes or something, but you can't really recover at that point if something goes wrong on the back end. You can do that if you don't have streaming on. I believe the plan is for streaming to be default on in 3.1, though that's probably something we want to discuss tomorrow. But Paul Henning has made sounds in that direction previously. I think.
Any further questions?
Okay, thanks.